Welcome back. Now, South Africa remains one of the countries with the highest rate of absentee fathers. The Sonke Gender Justice and the Human Science Research Council recently released a report. It states that 36% of children in South Africa live in the same household as their biological fathers, and that 35% of children in South Africa live in the same household with another man who's not their biological father. But once you're there for a child, that makes you a father. Stats SA also issued a report on fatherhood indicating that South Africa has the highest rates of absentee fathers in sub-Saharan Africa. It adds that out of more than 890,000 births registered in the country last year, about 62% of those births have no father's details. With that in mind, we're chatting about why there's so many absent fathers in South Africa. Let's explore this issue now. I'm joined in studio by fathers Kabelo Motlhakane, Mashitoa, Not In My Name SA founder Jentile, and Sonke Gender Justice activist Wessel van der Berg, and he joins us from our Cape Town studios. We'll go to Wessel in just a moment. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Sia, let's start with you. And when you look at some of the issues that have been raised in these reports, the idea of family has changed so much. You don't need to be a biological father in order to be a present father. Why is it that we're seeing in the country more and more that we don't have dads?
Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. I think first we need to admit that we've got a very dark and painful past, and some of these challenges that we see today that have seen many households without fathers have been a direct result of that, of the dark colonial past. And it's not an excuse, but it's one of the reasons. And as a country transitioning from this past into the contemporary South Africa, we've now been dealt a card that whereby we have to deal with these issues. And unfortunately, as difficult as it is, we have to. So some of these things can be attributed to that, and also unemployment, socioeconomic issues that are there. Some men, and in fact it was included in the report. I saw the report a few weeks ago that some men decided to even distance themselves from their children because they are unable to provide for them monetarily, which is one of the things that we have which are problematic. That fatherhood today has been stereotyped in the sense that masculinity in its own has been monetized. You're not a father if you can't provide monetarily. So those are some of the things that have seen us being in the situation that we are in now. So I think once we deal with that, we are well in our way to actually sorting out the issue of fatherhood in South Africa. And it's actually said that in the work that we do, I've observed that there is a direct correlation between the absenteeism of fathers and toxic masculinity, which see us having high raises and levels of gender-based violence in the country. So we are indeed in a crisis, but the good thing is that I love how the report articulates everything, where we are, where we come from, and what is it exactly that we need to do moving forward.
You mentioned a term, toxic masculinity. What are we talking about?
So toxic masculinity, first you need to talk about masculinity, which is its factors or its attributes that comes with being a boy child or with being a man. You can't be a man or a boy without being masculine. It's traditionally accepted that men or it's in fact psychologically or even medically, there's femininity which is attributes that are within the female, and then there's masculinity which is within the male. So now when you talk about toxic masculinity, you talk about hyper masculinity, you talk about mocha, I can't remember this term, then you talk about a man or a boy child who's an example that I can make, exerting violence, to reinforce your manhood or your boyhood. So when you talk about toxic masculinity, which again is what we have a problem of in this country, when you look at gender-based violence, you look at how men and boys present themselves, the violence can be attributed to that. So when you talk about toxic masculinity, it's one other thing that is directly influenced by the lack of fathers in South Africa.
Kabelo, with the context that Sia has just given, historically as well as socio-economic issues, we've made great strides in so many areas of our lives. We've progressed so much, but this issue, we're still sort of finding ourselves at the back. What informed or what shaped your understanding of what being a father is?
I think just picking up from what Sia just highlighted about a number of factors that actually play a role in what makes a man. I think personally, I've come to think or believe that most men actually learn how to be fathers from the opposite. So a lot of us do not learn how to be fathers from having a father that is there not just physically or financially, but a father that is there emotionally and otherwise. And it goes back to that whole concept of masculinity, which is a huge problem, where there's also expectations that society put on this whole construct of what a man is. You need to earn a certain amount of money, you need to be able to do 1, 2, 3, 4, your build has to be a certain way, and it's small little things. And I think for me it was a number of things, in the sense that my biological father was not present at all, and I learned how to be a father by virtue of observing my dad, who is my uncle, who basically made a conscious decision to be a dad. Because for me, being a dad is not entirely about contributing to the birth process of a child, but it's actually making a conscious decision to raise a child. And for me, it comes from the heart. So therefore, if one has not dealt with themselves, has not dealt with their own identity and their own understanding of what they actually should do in society and who they are meant to be, then you start seeing almost like a distorted narrative of the self. And I think for me, that's what it was. I learned how to be a dad from observing the men around me. And this was not just the men at home, it was the men on TV, it was the men that I encountered in my community. And obviously there were positives and negatives, and you took that which worked for you. And I think, if you look at the whole Bill Cosby issue, a lot of individuals, personally, I was one of those who were probably somewhat felt like they were cheated. Because I think if you look at it, the Cosby Show was probably one of the earliest renditions of a solid black house, where we were not seen as this comedic individuals who are constantly clowns and playing around. And he basically painted a picture of a black father that was present just beyond the physical. He was present emotionally. He spent time with his kids. And for a lot of us growing up, you looked at that and thought to yourself, I want to be that. Yeah. And when all of the scandals came out about him, you begin to think to yourself, but what happened? But I think for me, being a dad is constantly making that choice and decision every day to be present to my child.
Every single day. Any man can make a baby, but it takes a real man to be a father. Now, you also got the issue of some men who are being denied access to their children, which is also really a big problem.
No, of course it is. I mean, psychologically, I mean, like if you don't get into the whole, I mean, it depends on the two of you, on the mother and the child. It doesn't matter whether you romantically involved or not. And it does destroy us, as especially in the black community, where you have a baby and the next thing, the father is being denied access. It's a terrible thing, because now it doesn't only affect you psychologically, it affects the child as well. Because now, how's that child going to grow up with the masculinity thing that we were talking about? How are you going to know where, I mean, we need a father figure in your life. We really need it. And it's such a sad thing, because if the two can't actually agree on raising a child, you don't even have to be involved romantically.
You can co-parent very well.
You can co-parent, you don't have to. But if you guys don't come together and raise, because the child didn't do anything wrong. Right. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So basically we need that structure.
It's very important. Let's introduce our Cape Town guest from Sonke Gender Justice activist Wessel van der Berg. Wessel, thanks so much for joining us. Let's look at your report specifically. What is it that you guys were looking for?
Good morning, Duduzile. Thank you so much. The State of South Africa's Fathers Report was a collaboration between Sonke Gender Justice and the Human Sciences Research Council. And we wanted to capture a broader lens of fatherhood. I think, like your guests were saying this morning, there is a much broader landscape of fatherhood than only the biological father present in the house with the child. So what we wanted to do is to encourage the national surveys and future research to also look at the other kinds of fatherhood that are available to children in South Africa, and then to think about how do we activate that in addition to holding biological fathers responsible for their parenting role.
He mentions a point that we were talking about now in terms of not just someone who makes a child is a father. Sia, in the case of someone who does not want to take responsibility and be there for their child, I'm sure you know a couple of people, whether it's your immediate circle or people a bit further away from you, who are like that, who don't want to take responsibility. When we try to get to the bottom of it, what is it?
Honestly, I would say that I've met a couple, some of the guys that I know do that, but they would never come out and say, I don't want to take responsibility. They'll always come up with excuses. And I say excuses, not reasons now. These are excuses because, as it was mentioned, that for you to be a father, you don't necessarily you need to be an ATM. You don't necessarily need to be able to provide monetarily. You can be there emotionally, psychologically, especially in the first, which is another thing that they did mention on the report. The first 1,000 days of a child are very important. And if you try to link that with Erickson's psychological stages of a newborn, they say that is when a child learns the difference between trust and mistrust. And if you miss that important aspect or that important phase of a child, then that could affect their next relationships moving forward. So the guys will always come up with excuses and say, I'm unemployed, this and this and that. But for young guys and young fathers like myself and Kabelo, I think we don't have that much room for excuses. But if you talk to someone who's older man, in their 60s, they can easily tell you that, due to the agency of them having to work in the mines, the migrants, the system that I spoke about earlier, colonialism, that said a black man must move here and go and work in the mines 800 kilometers away, like my father did. He had to leave, and fortunately, we moved later from the Eastern Cape to Northwest to join him. So for somebody like that, some go. You have a look at reality shows like Utatako, Yukumbule Kaya, say Ubaba since Ahambile, 1981, he never came back. And this man, when they get there, they form other relationships with urban women and things like that. So reasons and excuses differ. But for a young father in the contemporary South Africa, like me, you have definitely no reason unless you are denied access to your child. Nakona, the access that you're being denied, it must come with reasons why. Because I know a friend who can't see their child because they don't afford the lobola yet. So for me, that on its own is a problem, because should the guy decide, I'm giving up, yes, 20 years later, they'll be told that your father gave up on you, your father was a loser, your father this and this. So we need to check both sides of the story. We're going to say men are absent, but now these are the very same men that some of them were denied access. But at the same time, these men, there are men that who are absent because they chose to. And we need to call them out and say they are cowards, because that's what you are. You're a coward. You can't impregnate a woman and then you decide to run away. You need to be there physically, whether you've got money or not.
You mentioned a very important term, excuses. Kabelo, how much of a factor is the way in which the girl child is raised as opposed to the boy child is raised? When we talk about things, simple things like, no, when the boy doesn't do this, or the boy is always excused from taking responsibility as opposed to women.
I think it goes back to, hypermasculinity and the narratives or stories rather that have been told about what it is to be a man are in themselves quite problematic. I grew up in a home where, my grandmother's one of those. There was no male or female in my grandmother's house. When it comes to cleaning, everybody cleans. When it's time to cook, when it's time to cook, everyone cooks. And for me, that's how I learned how to be a man. And also, I think it's one of those where I'm horrible at sports. Like, I really suck. And
It's okay, it's not for all of us.
And I can't even watch it. And that's the thing is, when you grow up in the township, Khotlala Polo is a thing. All the gents go kasi or go Khotladiwa Polo or Richuna di Kite and all sorts of other things. And for me, like, soccer is just like, nah, it's not for me. And you begin to then learn how to define yourself, but like I said, from the opposite. You observe the things that make you a man, and unfortunately you'll be picked on growing up, depending on the context that you're in. But I think for me, the stories that we tell about men are very important, especially a black man. You know, when you look at a lot of young boys and the stories they can tell you about their dads, a lot of it is not positive. And it's not even stories that you tell directly, but it's stories that kids hear and pick up from small
adults.
Conversations in the family, like during a family funeral or whatever it may be. Like those small little stories, like your dad, your dad is this and that and that.
Yeah.
And immediately this child begins to see end up smothering my child with time and attention and all sorts of things. So how do you actually create a balance? And maybe the challenge then begins to be, what systems or structures do we have in place that support new fathers in how to being fathers?
Because the focus is so much on women as well.
There's a
Wessel,
lot of support.
perhaps in closing the conversation, how do we make it better?
I think we need to change it. We need to change it.
I think we should encourage boys to play with dolls. We should destigmatize male caregiving and encourage boys to be affirmed when they do caregiving things. That's number one at a household level. Secondly, in our report, we found that men who access the child support grant use it in the same way that women do. They use it on school and on nutrition and on clothing. So for those low-income households where men are the primary caregivers, there are men who are doing the right thing. And then thirdly, at a more structural level, we are very pleased to announce that parenting leave will now be available for fathers as soon as our President signs off on it. It has just been approved by Parliament in August last week, and we will now see that fathers qualify for 10 days of parenting leave on the birth of a child. And I encourage all fathers and mothers out there to make sure that fathers use that time to care for children.
Indeed. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us this morning. Speaking to fathers, Kabelo Motlhakane. Now, Kabelo. Today, thank you, Kabelo. Now, Mashitoa, and of course, not in my name, founder Jentile. Wessel van der Berg is from the Sonke Gender Justice. Thank you, gentlemen. We take a short break. We're back with your newspaper review after this.